Hey everyone. Thanks to Ledger for hosting this amazing event. Welcome to my talk on how developer experience powers great user experience. So Ledger being one of the most prolific user-facing applications in the blockchain space, I figured this conference would have a lot about how to deliver amazing user experiences, the things we're building for consumers in the blockchain space. Alchemy, the company I work for, we're primarily focused on how we can build for developers, how we can empower people like the developers at Ledger to do the things they do. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about why we think that's important and why we think it pushes in the same direction as building great UXs directly. So first, a little bit about me. My name is Mike Garland. I'm on the product team at Alchemy. Before joining Alchemy, I was an engineer at places like Palantir, started my own company, always on the engineering side. But in the process, fell in love with developer tools, with platforms, with the kind of tooling that empower developers to do the things they do. And so when I started to explore the Web3 space, saw that there was a need for this kind of tooling, a need for better abstractions, for better tools for developers to build. And when I found Alchemy, fell in love with their approach to doing that. And so now what I do is I spend most of my day talking to Web3 developers, like the folks at Ledger, who we've gotten to know quite well, as well as now tens of thousands of teams building in the space. And what we try to do with that is build products, build APIs, developer tools, dashboards, to make these people 10x better at building what they're building, to help them do it quicker, deliver better user experiences, all through having a better experience as a builder. Most recently, my own focus has been on our multi-chain support. So we've worked with Ethereum for a long time. Obviously, there are many other networks now that are quite popular, both with consumers and developers, so expanding to those worlds, as well as things like our NFT API, so abstractions that make it easier to access the kinds of data on blockchains that developers really need. And a bit about Alchemy. So Alchemy is a blockchain developer platform. What does that really mean? It means that we build products to dramatically improve the lives of developers. And we do so across pretty much all major use cases in blockchain. So we work with a ton of DeFi projects. I think greater than 50% of the total assets locked in DeFi. Also with NFTs, so we power all, if not most, of the major NFT platforms and NFT projects that have launched. And like I mentioned, in total, we now work with 10,000 plus teams, tens of thousands of developers to help them accomplish their goals of building amazing things in the blockchain space. All along the way, we've been really fortunate to be supported by a number of great partners and investors, helping us achieve these things, kind of pushing that mission forward. And our own team comes from scaling infrastructure and building developer tools at some of the largest, most successful Web2 companies. Our goal really is to take the expertise in building infrastructure from these places, adapt them to the kind of unique products and ethos of Web3, and deliver as good a development experience, but one that's built from scratch for what people need in this particular ecosystem. So back to the question, why developers? Why focus on this part of the ecosystem building process? I think we can all agree we want blockchain to reach more people than it does today. I think I've seen several companies have the goal of bringing blockchain to 1 billion people. And I think there's a common understanding that great UX is one of the best tools we have in making that happen. Improving the experience for new users, for existing users, is something I think we can all agree is going to help drive those next billion people. I think this is not so controversial. What might be more controversial is my argument is great developer experience, great DevX, is the greatest tool we can flex in getting to that better UX and driving billions of users into blockchain. Of course, product designers, developers, protocol specialists, they will all play a massive role in building these great UXs, these great products, bringing it to so many more people. But I think when we do it at an ecosystem scale, among the greatest tools, if not the greatest, as I'll argue, will be up-leveling the toolkit that developers are using themselves. So if we're trying to make blockchain hit 1 billion users, and we're trying to figure out how we can do it most quickly, it makes sense to start with the users. We want to bring in as many people as we can, give them access to amazing new things that they weren't able to do before using the power of blockchain and Web3. But of course, users don't exist in a bubble. They need something to use. So it doesn't really start with users. It starts with products. It starts with those experiences that allow them to own things in a digital way that they never have before, or transfer funds in a way that they haven't had the kind of seamless experience with in the past. And so products are really where it starts. But of course, products don't build themselves. They don't just appear out of nowhere. You need a way to create those products in the first place. And that is where developers come in. So I would argue it actually all starts with developers. And there's no hidden fourth option here. Really, though, this entire thing is connected. So users have a role to play as well. They create a market for developers. They create a financial incentive. They create an audience. They give more developers a reason to join the space in the first place. I would argue there's a reason that there weren't tens of thousands of developers in the blockchain space in its earliest days, and that's because there wasn't a consumer audience to build for. There wasn't a lot to get excited about for developers who care more about than just the core technology for technology's sake. And so you need to attract users to attract a lot of talent to get that flywheel going. And so together I would call this entire thing an ecosystem and a flywheel. And so by putting effort into any one of the pieces of this flywheel, you can drive growth of the entire overall ecosystem. Ecosystems that now we call Ethereum, Avalanche, Polygon, Flow, the different blockchains we know and love today. The problem, though, is when you're building and you're building for one of these ecosystems, particularly with a new technology, is building can be incredibly hard. And so when you look at where this kind of flywheel gets gummed up and where it slows down, it tends to be in the actual building phase. How does a developer take the ideas they have in their head and turn it into real product? In the early days, documentation may not be great. The technology itself may still be rough around the edges. The tooling and abstractions that exist to help people tap into the technology may not be there at all. And so this kind of core piece is maybe the one that struggles the most in the early days. And this is the piece that I would call developer experience, right? This is the process of developers turning their ideas into actual products. So kind of exactly what we're talking about today. And the challenge within blockchain is building in blockchain right now is almost identical to building for the web in the early 90s. There's this incredibly powerful technology to take advantage of, so much excitement, so much potential. But the tooling to help you tap into it is super nascent. So in the web days, you're building on TCP/IP, FTP. You come in to build a chat app or a social media application, and instead you spend all of your time learning about these base protocols. You're building using tools directly in the terminal. It's doable. You can push through it, but it's slow, it's clunky. And at the end of the day, you spend way less time building product than understanding the base levels of the technology. And when you have these kind of rudimentary tools, you end up building rudimentary products. And in the blockchain space, obviously, there are phenomenal products being built, incredible experiences. It's why there's so much excitement around the world about what Web3 is able to do. But they're doing it despite the tooling, not because of it in a lot of cases. And so our thesis is, if you up-level the tooling, you up-level what teams are able to build. The things that are looking amazing today may 10 years from now look like they were the first steps that we took, because we'll be able to build much more incredible experiences. So we're talking about building. Let's actually dig in. Let's theoretically build something together. So let's say, in this case, you're building a wallet. Given where we are today, let's say you're building an industry-leading wallet. What might you want to do? You want to send and receive transactions. You want to be able to store private keys. These are table stakes. But if you start to think about differentiated user experience, what users are going to expect, what will delight them, you might come to something like transaction history. You want to show them all of those send and receives. You want to let them look through the history of everything they've done. Give them parity even with a Web 2 product they might be used to, like Venmo. So at least kind of meet their expectations and allow them to get the kind of product experience they demand from this kind of financial application. Seems straightforward enough. Should be pretty easy to build, right? Turns out it's not. It's not at all. To get this kind of transaction history, you literally need to parse every block and every transaction for the blockchain you're working with. For Ethereum, this is now billions of data points that you need to process. It takes weeks to do this processing, even if you have the code written already. After that, you need to store it all in custom infrastructure. It's a very costly process to begin with. It requires maintenance over time. And so it's prohibitively hard to do for most projects that are building in the space. If you're very well resourced with a big team, you can push through, you can afford to invest in this kind of thing. But it means that innovation is happening in fewer places, right? And so we have fewer opportunities to develop new great products and UXs. So maybe a wallet is particularly difficult. Let's take another example. Let's say you're building an NFT marketplace like OpenSea. So So again, you might expect to be able to send and receive NFTs, browse different collections, engage in kind of the basic functionality of a marketplace. But as soon as you get into, what am I going to do to deliver the best possible user experience, you'll quickly get to an NFT portfolio. So for a given user, they sign in, they want to be able to see what NFTs they actually own, see if there are any they need to buy or sell, manage their collection, whatever it may be. And so again, I think we're not even at the level of delighting users yet. We're kind of meeting their expectations and providing kind of a comprehensive product experience to them. And so, again, seems straightforward enough. Should be pretty easy to build, right? Turns out, no, we run into the same issue that we ran into with indexing transfers. You actually need to look at every block, every transaction. You need to piece together the current state of what NFTs they own. In this case, it's even worse because you need to index on-chain and off-chain metadata. There are tons of challenges to actually building this. The transfers example we talked through might take a few weeks of an engineering team's time plus ongoing maintenance. This kind of feature maybe takes months plus a full staffed team of engineers to maintain and keep updated. So it's super, super costly for a team to actually build out this kind of thing that should be table stakes, right? It's the kind of thing that users from the products that they use every day on their phones and on the web are going to be used to. And so obviously this is not great. So maybe we've been starting with full products. We've started with a wallet. We've started with an NFT marketplace. Let's roll it back a little bit. We're new to building. We've only been here for about 10 minutes together. Let's start simple. Let's say you want to send one NFT. Super simple. It's maybe the second or third most basic use case I can think of for blockchain. So how do we actually do this? And what might users expect? So I'm sure all of us in this room are familiar with a core UX challenge of blockchain. That blocks only come every so often. For Ethereum, roughly every 12 or 13 seconds. Users tend to be impatient, right? They want to buy or sell things instantly. They want to see kind of instant responses to their activity online. It's the experience they're used to from the Web 2 world. And so one of the kind of design patterns that's come up to deal with this in the blockchain space is at least giving them updates and kind of real-time information on what's going on with their assets. So if it's not going to be mined and it's not going to be officially transferred for 12 seconds, let's give them the kind of transfer pending indicator. Sometimes at Alchemy we talk about this in Domino's terms. I don't know if y'all know Domino's Pizza, but when you order a pizza, they would give you kind of the status indicator of where the pizza was along its journey to your home, so that you're not just waiting kind of silently for 30 minutes. An innovation that took them from kind of a niche fast food pizza restaurant to something that is now one of the largest companies in the world. Same kind of idea here, right? Like users want feedback on what's going on. They don't want to be left in the dark. So again, table stakes experience, I think, part of delivering a great user experience for people using blockchain. So please let this be easy. We failed with our wallet. We failed with our NFT marketplace. Sending one transaction and giving people status updates, that must be achievable, right? No, this also is not easy. In particular, if that user goes back and refreshes their page, there's a very strong chance that they get this kind of error message or that their asset, their transfer is gone. And the reason for that is that typical approaches to infrastructure fail super quickly in Web3. There are unique challenges to building out the core level of infrastructure, the way you interact with the chain, that expose challenges that most people haven't had to deal with before, that really people outside of Web3 haven't had to deal with at all. And so when you're approaching it as a developer new to the space or even an experienced team, it's very easy to fall into pitfalls like this. I would say, in our experience over the last 3 or 4 years working with thousands of teams, almost every team that we've ever talked to has built infrastructure that has exactly this problem. And so it's not because they're not extremely talented engineers, it's because it's an extremely complicated problem to solve. It's taken us now years of collective eng time to tackle this. And I think so diving into how we solve this, I was talking with the Ledger team a little bit about it before. It could probably be an hour-long talk on its own, if not more. Like our architecture diagram is pretty expansive and kind of crazy. So I'll spare you all the details. If you want to nerd out on it with me, find me afterwards. I love to talk about this stuff. But the short kind of explanation is different nodes on a blockchain all sync with the chain independently. They all have different state, which means they have different blocks, different transactions. Some of them, the ones in green, might have the CryptoKitty that you sent. The ones in red might not. And that means when your application is getting data from the ones in green, your kitty is there. When it gets data from ones in red, your kitty is not. This is one particular kind of way of architecting your system with building blockchain infrastructure. But no matter what you do, unless you're putting in a ton of effort into kind of custom design patterns, you're effectively left having to choose between scale, reliability, and correct data. You can get 2 of the 3, but not all 3 at once. And obviously, if you're building an application, if your intent is to bring in 1 billion users, you need all 3 of these things, right? Scale is going to help you serve those 1 billion users. Reliability is going to help you make sure your product is actually there for them to use. And correct data is going to prevent you from running into issues like this disappearing CryptoKitty. Prevent pretty terrible user experiences from happening. And so this is where we come back to why developers, right? We think our role in all this is that by solving these root problems, we can return literally hundreds of thousands of hours collectively back to developers, designers, protocol specialists, product people. All the great talent that comes into the space in the first place to build amazing things, we can help them redirect their hours back to the things they wanted to build in the first place. Like I would venture to say, very few people come into the blockchain space to worry about node infrastructure. Way more people come into the space to think about what are the amazing things I can do with NFTs? What are the social experiences I can create? How can I unseat banks and deliver the kind of next wave of financial applications? And so really our goal is let's help people move in that direction by refocusing their effort back to product. And so that's why we as a company have focused on this link, right? All of our collective effort is going towards improving the step where developers build products so that developers can focus on the actual building portion. So now let's revisit these examples with Alchemy and some of the tooling that we've built out inserted. So let's say we're back to building an industry-leading wallet. You can index billions of data points, spend weeks, you can build out custom infrastructure, or you can spend 10 minutes reading documentation, and you can use our transfers API. So we have all this information indexed. You can say, you know, for Vitalik, I want to see all of the transactions he has from block 0 to the current block on Ethereum, and in 10 milliseconds, you get your response with all of the transactions there for you to display. So we've now taken a multi-week, potentially multi-month process and really just distilled it down to how quickly you can read some documentation and turn that into a single line of code. A little bit more complicated example, let's say in Nft Marketplace again. So you can, again, look at billions of data points, look at every transaction. In the NFT example, you also have to spend time learning about almost every single NFT project and how they deal with off-chain metadata. This multi-month to year-long process involving tons of developer time. Or again, you can spend 10 minutes reading documentation, and you can use a single, super intuitive API, right? Even for the non-developers in this room, get NFTs with an Ethereum address, pretty understandable at how that's going to work and what it's going to return to you. So now we've returned, you know, for even a single team using this, probably hundreds to thousands of engineering hours that can go into building great products. One of the cool things is we've worked with Dapper Labs for a long time. The CryptoKitties example is quite real. When we first started building 3 years ago, they were one of the teams that kind of tipped us off to the consistency issue with sending transactions and giving updates. And they literally, when they started working with us and using our infrastructure, were able to rededicate their time towards building NBA Top Shot, Flow, like all of the kind of product experiences they have now by units of full engineers, right? They were able to take 3 or 4 people who are working on this problem full time and rededicate them, which I think is kind of in action what I'm trying to describe here, where we can have talent working on more productive things if we can work together to solve these problems as an ecosystem. And so finally, back to the CryptoKitties example, if you want to send one NFT, and now let's say we're confident we've crushed our wallet, we've crushed our marketplace. We want to be able to build whatever we want with scale, data consistency, and reliability. How do we do that? Instead of spending tons of time building out custom infrastructure, again, we can get all 3 with one line of code. In a lot of cases, it won't even be a line of code. You just configure your existing application to use Alchemy instead of something else. And so, again, 10 minutes reading through documentation, 5 minutes of implementation, and you get all of those things that you could have otherwise spent months or years of collective engineering time on. And so, you might still agree with me. I hope I've at least moved the needle a little bit, that developer experience is incredibly important in achieving the top line goals that we have as an ecosystem, whether it's the number of users, the social impact, the kind of ethos we're trying to push as an ecosystem. But at the very least, I hope you can see the importance of developer experience. Even if you don't agree it's the most important, I would love to hear your thoughts about what are. So please find me afterwards. Would love to talk about any of this stuff. And if you don't have time to talk to me here, definitely find us on Twitter, Discord. Our whole business is understanding developers and what they need, trying to make their lives easier. The folks in this room, we would love to talk to. So find us however it may be. We'd love to chat. Thanks. And I don't know how I'm doing on time. If people have questions, I'm happy to stick around and answer some. Yeah.
Web3 is about being decentralized, getting back ownership, etc. You know the story. How would you address the fact that you might become a single point of failure if you get
Yeah.
I mean, like the banks today, crypto.
It's a great question. So for those who couldn't hear, the question is, the entire point of this space is decentralization. A provider like Alchemy, if we get big, a single point of failure, right? Doesn't that kind of undermine the entire reason we're building in this space? I think it's a great question. It's something we ask ourselves a lot. In fact, when we started building out our platform, the first thing we did before we wrote a single line of code is we actually did 100 plus, I think 150 interviews with teams building in the space. And we asked them, like, what is most important out of the developer platform you want to use? And we gave them options like performance, scale, reliability, correct data, decentralization. And I think at the time, decentralization was last or second to last on the list for every team building. And I think that's not because decentralization isn't super important. Like, it is literally the reason we're here. It's just because we need to be able to build things making the right trade-offs in the short term. And so I think our goal has been to be kind of practical in the short term, but aspirational in the long term. And so right now, while our product suite may be, as it grows, a little bit of a centralized choke point, there are things that we can do over time to decentralize even what we're doing. We're never going to have the opportunity to do that if there aren't great products getting users into the space in the first place to justify that existing. So I think this is actually a design pattern that's kind of important to consider as an ecosystem is how do you make the right trade-offs for decentralization in the short term and make sure that you're keeping yourself honest building towards greater and greater decentralization in the long term. So our answer to it now is a little bit centralized, but you can audit everything on chain. The data itself is totally decentralized. The applications themselves are decentralized as well. And so we will push for greater decentralization in the future, even with the kind of core infrastructure that we're building, but it's a process. Yeah.
And what's about the solution of Mina protocol with creating because snarks when you always have the last snapshot of the chain and it's have like 22 kilobytes. You don't need to spend many times to check that it's all true and use Mina protocol like outsource the ability for your chain or any other chain.
Yeah, so the question is, what about Mina protocol? I guess the role that zero knowledge plays in making these things smaller, easier to use, easier to tap into. So I don't know Mina protocol in particular. Would love to chat with you about it afterwards. But I think when it comes to like ZK and all these ways of kind of condensing down state for blockchains, I think it's very helpful when you're looking at like proofs and consensus and how the chain actually operates. But when you're talking about applications, like they actually want all that data. I was actually talking with the Ledger team. There's an EIP right now to maybe discontinue archive support for Ethereum. And it's something that we're kind of pushing back on because all of that data is really, really useful to delivering great product experiences. And so while you might be able to condense down the state for particular applications, like how does consensus function, if you want to leave open everything that product experiences can deliver, I think you need that data somewhere accessible. And I think there's room for us to help kind of deliver better experiences for developers. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Also, I have no idea what time it is if I'm close to out of time, just falling off stage. Awesome.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. So I see that most of the chains that you've shown us that Alchemy has integrated are EVM based. What are some of the struggles with integrating like Bitcoin or UTXO chains, and why doesn't Alchemy push into that space?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think the answer to that is partially challenges with UTXO, partially just our goals as a company. This might be wrong, right? We're trying to gather as much data as we can, but there may be blind spots. From what we can tell, there is much more developer activity, like application building, happening on smart contract chains, right? When you have the ability to build kind of generic applications, it attracts kind of more varied use cases, more overall developers. And really our core goal is how do we empower developers? I think there are plenty of companies that are focusing on the consumer experience, consumer infrastructure, how you can support people who want to buy and sell and trade particular assets. But really, like, we see our kind of unique contribution as helping out developers. And so answer number one is, we just see less developers on UTXO chains. And so it hasn't been a focus for us so far. I think the other answer is, frankly, it is quite different than supporting something like Ethereum or even something else that maybe isn't quite Ethereum but similar, like Solana. And so we're trying to triage our effort in the best ways possible. Supporting two completely different models of chains would add a lot of overhead. So I think it's just weighing like the trade-offs of expanding to an Avalanche or another EVM chain, which is maybe closer at hand, versus supporting a UTXO chain. So I think, again, like, if there is a lot of developer activity on UTXOs that we're just not tapped into, certainly something we'd be open to and putting in the effort to support.
Cool, thanks.
Hey, thank you for the great talk.
Thanks.
So you've presented very nice APIs for the developers to simply request the blockchain. But I was wondering if the problem was not in the blockchain itself. Namely, it seems quite strange that it's so complicated to access, for instance, the wallet of someone, or the list of things he owns, or the list of transactions he owns. So I've never really developed a blockchain myself, but isn't it something that could be improved directly at the level of the blockchain?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So basically, is it something that can happen at the blockchain level instead of happening one level up with a system like Alchemy? I think so. In general, my answer to that would be blockchain is pretty use case agnostic. Like, when blockchains are being built, it's very hard for the builders of those protocols to predict everything that developers could possibly want to build with their chains. Like, maybe they thought of this back in the day, but I would guess the founders of Ethereum hadn't thought specifically of all the varied DeFi protocols, all the things you can do with NFTs, of DAOs. They may have known in concept, but they probably couldn't have known exactly how these things would take shape. And a lot of the difficulties in accessing this data comes from the first person who builds an NFT smart contract. What way do they build it in? How do they expose the data? And so it's really a choice that's left up to developers after the blockchain is already created. And so I think it's partially hard to predict all these things. I also don't think a blockchain should aspire to solve all these problems. Like, really, a blockchain's use is the consensus, the security, solving problems like making sure transaction fees are low, transaction speeds are high, and that everything happens as securely as possible. Like, if protocol researchers can just nail that, I think that's really the core goal of the blockchain technology itself. And then there is the role of, so there's node software on top of that, which I think can do more than just the consensus piece. And I think there are parts of this that nodes can do well themselves. And we actually work very closely with the kind of core node teams, the open source software teams on all the ecosystems we work with. Because if it can kind of reasonably be solved at the node level, we would love for that to happen. And so we actually kind of push that effort forward. But there are just some ways of accessing data, some ways of storing data that are too difficult, too expensive, too time consuming for every node to be considered responsible for solving. And so I think it's a matter of finding like which piece of the stack is responsible for the right pieces. But yeah, it's a good question.
Thanks.
Awesome.
So we have time for one more question, and that's it.
Cool. I think that's it. If anybody has more questions or wants to talk about anything, feel free to find me after. Thanks, guys.